What's up, everyone? I thought I would shoot a video real quick on my Viper cut. I always seem to get a lot of questions about how I did it and just kind of everything surrounding it. So first off, I figured I would kind of start with the tools I used. When I first decided to do this, I watched every video that I could. I looked at every forum post that I could find. I just tried to dig up as much information about doing this as possible. And there's a lot of ways to tackle this, and there's a lot of wrong ways to do it. Even if you do it a wrong way and you don't necessarily have the right tools, you'll find that a lot of people still end up with pretty good results. And that's because of the finishing trim. Even if your line isn't, perfectly smooth or clean, the finishing trim will usually hide a lot of your mistakes. But if your line isn't straight, the trim isn't going to hide that. So I thought I would go over the best tools to use for the job, how I kind of taped it off and decided where to cut and stuff like that, and where I cut in regards to the fender and the mounting points and stuff there, as well as kind of what I did with this and how I dealt with the wheel liner, which actually seems to be the main question that I get. It's also a question that I had when I went into this, and I struggled to find any answers, like any really good answers on how to deal with the liner, other than just straight up chopping it off, which is an option, but I didn't want to go that route. So first, let's start with the tools that I used. The main tool is going to be some kind of oscillating multi-tool, and I have this one by Dremel. This is the blade that you're going to want to use. The blade says it is a wood and metal blade, and it will work great on plastic as well. You can see it's just some fine serrated teeth. I don't know if that's going to focus or not, but it's just these fine serrated teeth, and basically this thing just vibrates back and forth, and it cut this thing like butter. It cut super straight, super smooth, and made quick work out of it. There was no cracking or anything of the paint. So this worked extremely well, and I highly recommend, if you can that you should use this. The issue with using some kind of a wheel, whether it's like a Dremel with a cutoff wheel, or shoot, I've seen people use angle grinders, which to me is gnarly. I could see that going wrong a lot of different ways, but I mean, props to the guys that tackled it that way. When you're using a wheel, a lot of times you find that as you're cutting, it kind of wants to, sometimes it'll grab and it'll bounce out, and it's just not going to be as smooth or as easy, especially trying to use that little Dremel wheel to kind of get all the way through this line. It's not the easiest way to do it. This is the easiest way to do it. Also, props to the dude that I saw use a wood cutting handsaw. I saw a dude on YouTube use the handsaw, and it looked like a wood handsaw too, and he just chopped right through this thing, and it was, so there's a lot of ways to do it. Next thing you're gonna need, if you like this rounded radius here, rather than like a hard 90, what I recommend to get the smoothest, perfect, circle radius is a hole saw. I went with a 2.5-inch hole saw, and it's kind of got this like quick detach feature. But regardless of what kind of hole saw you get one that has the centering bit, so you stay nice and centered up on your hole. Next is a drill with a small bit, and you're gonna use this bit to be the starter hole for when you're ready to drill this. So, as you know, most people use painter's tape to line this out and pick their line where they're gonna cut. I did the same thing. And so you see what I did here is I used a yellow masking tape to cover the entire area on the fender. That way I could try to mitigate any paint cracking or anything like that and keep the line smooth. And then I used blue tape to create my line. And what I did is I just used the outside edge as my line for where I was gonna cut. And then hopefully you'll be able to see this. I drew a little quarter circle where it was gonna line up for where my hole saw was gonna cut. You'll also notice that there's a tiny little dot right there, and that would be the center of my hole saw. That's where I'm gonna start my hole. And the way that I lined all that up was I used a set of calipers, and I took half of my diameter, which my hole saw was 2.5 inches, so I used a 1.25 inches for my radius, and I just lined this up kind of both ways like this and kind of just drew that like quarter circle and found where center would be. And that's kind of how I found the center of where I was going to want to drill with my hole saw. So after you do that, you're going to punch that small hole. I'm using a 1/8 bit, and then you'll do your hole saw. And then once you punch out that hole, oh, I'm sorry, 1 second. Take it back for just a second. When you go to do the hole saw, drill your full size hole, and then use the hole saw to drill that hole. And the reason for that is because this bit only sticks up maybe 1/4 inch past the hole saw. Once this bit grabs your bumper and it will pull the blade toward your bumper, and it may cause you to skip or jump or something like that, and you could potentially start your cut not necessarily where you wanted it to be. So what you want to do is you want to drill the hole first, then put your hole saw on, and then go ahead and get the set the bit inside of the hole that you've drilled and get the drill running, and then move it closer to the bumper so then it starts cutting, and it'll cut through super nice and clean. I didn't have any cracking. I barely even had to clean it up, so that method worked really well for me. All right, so then after your hole's cut, then you're going to go in with this and cut your 2 lines from here, from the bottom up to your hole, and then from your hole out to your fender, and you're just going to follow your blue tape all the way across. In my case, I ended up, once I got to here, I just cut through just the fender portion and removed that, and then I cut through the body portion. And I'll splice in a little time lapse of me doing the cut real quick so you can kind of see the process. All right, once you're done with the cut, then you're gonna want to clean up your edge a little bit if you need to. And the reason for that is that the edge trim is kind of a pain in the butt to get on, or at least the kind that I have. So I needed to make sure that I was able to pry it open and fit it over the bumper, and it took some kind of cleaning up this and narrowing out this back edge, this inside edge. Just kind of cleaning that up so I could get my edge trim on. I also got edge trim with an adhesive on it, and that adhesive will make sure, obviously, that your edge trim stays in place. 2 tips for the edge trim. One is I used a trim removal tool to kind of help open it up as I was feeding it. So I would open it up and then push it all into place. And the second tip that'll kind of help out with that is you can heat it up a little bit with a heat gun. Just a little bit, just barely get it warm so it's a little more pliable, because it holds together pretty well. If you heat it up, it'll be easier to work with. So that should make quick work of the edge trim. In regards to kind of how and where I taped it off, I've seen a lot of people cut all different heights, because when you bring your tape around this bend, once you get to here, even if you followed this line perfectly, your tape could end up here, it could end up down here, it can kind of end up in any different space, and it's still going to look good, because you essentially have 2 lines. You have this line going to here, and then this line going to here. And when you make this corner, you can kind of make an adjustment as far as angle. This can kind of be whatever angle you want. You can come from here and come down and then around straight down this body line, or you can just do what I did and cut here. And I'm going to show you exactly kind of where I cut and why I cut there. The reason I cut there is because there's normally a bolt that holds, or there is a bolt that holds kind of this fender and everything in place, and I wanted that all to stay there, just because I wasn't really sure like if it was gonna allow this fender, cutting that out, if this would be loose or flopping around. I just kind of wanted to make sure that this was still going to be secure once I cut. So I'll show right now where the cut ended, so you know kind of how I tackled this. You can see where I made my cut. I made it just underneath that fender, so this is all still being held in place and everything like that. All right, another thing I want to touch on is where to cut in regards to the bottom portion of the bumper. Now, because I have an aftermarket bumper, that mount that is normally here, there's a crossbar that normally goes from that aluminum portion inside of your bumper, and it connects, I think, like right about out here. There would be a bolt that goes underneath that holds your bumper kind of all together and keeps it stable and whatnot. If you have an aftermarket Valance style bumper like I do, that will no longer be there. So this piece would normally be about this long, and it's just sitting down here just flopping around. It's normally very unstable, and it vibrates and stuff like that. So I made a little mount. I just took some aluminum angle iron or whatever, and I got that 3M automotive tape, put it on both sides, and I ended up essentially sticking this part of the bumper to my steel bumper. So that's how I took care of that. If you don't have an aftermarket bumper, I would recommend cutting around that bolt and leaving that bolt in place, and not cutting right up against the body line, because then that way you'll still have a place for your bumper to mount up. If you have an aftermarket bumper, it's not really going to matter. You can tackle that kind of however you want. I ended up cutting this shorter, and I think I'm still even going to trim off a little bit more, because I still think I could take off maybe another inch of this and it would still look the way that I want it to. Now real quick, I'm going to show exactly what I did with the inside fender and kind of how I tackled that. Like I said, I didn't want to just chop it off. I wanted there to still be some protection from water intrusion and stuff like that, water and mud, just that way it wouldn't get too nasty inside of the engine bay when I'm out in the dirt. So I'll go ahead and show you exactly how I tackled that. Now in regards to what I did with my fender. So as you can see, it's kind of tucked up and pushed out of the way. So what I did is, you'll notice from here to all the way to here is it's cut. So what I did is, normally that fender, it comes down here like this and then straight out. What I did is I cut off that bottom portion, that little L shape. I just cut off that little shelf and then left everything else intact. Then what I did was I just applied a bunch of heat to this area and kind of all underneath here and kind of like around this area here, just this whole kind of lower portion. I got it nice and soft, and then I pushed this area right up against the frame here, and this is all like melted and creased and everything, and I just pushed it all into there and then let it cool so it would stay in place. And then I just used a zip tie and passed it through that frame hole there, and that's kind of holding that in place there. So just apply heat and work it and keep pushing it. You can kind of see it's a little warped here and stuff, and once you get it hot and shape it the way you want, once it cools, it will stay out of the way. So I've had it like this. I've been driving around like this for a while. Obviously you can see it from down low, but from standing upright, you're not going to be able to see it until you get down to here. So it stays out of the way, it looks good, and it's going to keep all the mud from shooting up inside of there. Hopefully that helped out. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll try to help you out the best I can. Have a good one.